Due to the following CBS School Break special, Magnum PI will not be seen today. It will be broadcast tomorrow in the regular time period.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by AlexRossArt.com. Alex is a brand new graphic novel coming out from Marvel and Abrams Books. Fantastic Four, Full Circle. It comes out September 6th. It's a rainy night in Manhattan, and not a creature is stirring except for the Thing, Ben Grimm. When an intruder suddenly appears inside the Baxter Building, the Fantastic Four find themselves surrounded by a swarm of invading parasites. These carrion creatures, composed of negative energy, come to Earth using a human host as a delivery system. But for what purpose? And who is behind this untimely invasion? The Fantastic Four have no choice but to journey to the Negative Zone, an alien universe comprised entirely of antimatter, risking not just their own lives, but the fate of the cosmos. Fantastic Four, Full Circle is the first long-form work written and illustrated by acclaimed artist Alex Ross, who revisits a classic Lee Kirby story from the 60s and introduces the storyline for a new generation of readers. Bold, vivid colors, his trademark visual storytelling, Ross takes Marvel's first team of superheroes to places only he can illustrate. The book also features a special poster jacket with the front flap unfolding to reveal an all-new, fully painted origin story of the Fantastic Four. Again, Fantastic Four, Full Circle, out September 6th. For more details, go to AlexRossArt.com.
The Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Always happy to welcome Rob Salkowitz back to Word Balloon. Rob, we spoke, I know, at the beginning of the pandemic. Did we talk since then?
I don't know. Time is a weird accordion these days. But every time we sit down, it feels like it was just yesterday. So
well, there you go. Attaboy.
Let's go with that.
Good answer. You're just back from New York Comic Con, and you've certainly done a few reports over at ICV2 and at Forbes. Those are great places to see Rob's columns. Is there another platform, Rob, that people should go to?
Yeah, I do occasional stuff for Publishers Weekly. I just did a big story on Heavy Metals News about their new distribution over at PW. But mostly it's I got a bunch of stuff teed up for Forbes over the next week. Some lots of different stories on different aspects of stuff that's going on. So stay tuned.
Well, you always have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the nerd world. And you've written books about the subject as well. And this is a constant chorus on my part when I talk to different people. I was talking to Mark Guggenheim on Monday about streaming TV and film and things like that. It really does seem like the pandemic accelerated a lot of things that were starting to happen when even before COVID started, in terms of viewing habits on the video and storytelling standpoint that way. Just people were falling out of going to movies other than big spectacles and things like that. And things were shifting. And I know that things are shifting as well in both the publishing world, but also the live event world. And I know that was something we've talked about in recent conversations, that a lot of pop-up events and a lot of things like that were starting to happen. And then unfortunately COVID came and obviously closed a lot of that down. Now that, and I know, I don't know about where you are in Washington State, but in Illinois, they're kind of like, at least at the mask suggestion point again, as we head into the winter months. And there is concerns about the way COVID is, kind of mutating and everything. But certainly with the virus or with the booster shots and things, it's a much more manageable situation. It's all dependent on the individual. But how are things going in terms of pop-up live events? And also we'll get to, just the big macro look of things like New York Comic Con. And I don't know if you went to San Diego, but tell me again, the pop-up events, where are we with that kind of stuff right now?
So I think that's starting to come back. I mean, especially in places that are more lightly regulated and don't have the, either the public regulations or the level of concern about it. A lot of the smaller shows are coming back. I mean, I think Baltimore was either this weekend or last weekend.
Next weekend.
Next weekend, right?
Yeah.
And then, SPX and some of those. So that level of show, in addition to, I was at New York, I was at San Diego, I was at Emerald City Comic Con here in Seattle, which they had a show. Usually that show is in spring, but they moved it to the late summer so that they can get back on track in 2023, so they can go back to a sort of a March-April timeframe, which is their natural
Certainly.
position for that. I was invited to a couple of shows that I was actually I was invited to the Chicago show, the Fan Expo Chicago.
Oh yeah, I was there.
But I couldn't make it, and then so they invited me again to their Toronto show, which I've really been wanting to go to, and didn't. And I heard that was enormous. That was their biggest one yet. It was like 160, 170,000 in Toronto. So big show for them. In a couple of weeks, I'm actually doing a one-day show in Las Vegas being put on by their public library. So the fact that we're seeing shows coming back at all different levels is promising, but there's a lot of other stuff. Like when you go to these shows, it's like this thing with the, like you're teaching your dog to sing opera, and it's not that the dog sings well, it's that he's singing at all. And that's sort of where we're at with the conventions. Is fans are so happy to be back.
Yeah.
The exhibit floors are full. Don't look too
Really?
hard at the quality of the exhibitors necessarily, because
Okay.
we're not seeing top tier publishers and top tier exhibitors necessarily hurrying back to these shows. When you look at the guest lists, it's like you'll see names that you recognize, but it's a little more of the shop worn, people that are it's like, don't get me wrong, I love me some Back to the Future, but do I need to run out and see the Back to the Future cast as the headliners at a show? All right. I mean, it's cool that they're doing it, but it's New York upped their game. Like New York had some top tier people. San Diego did as well. But I think the exhibitors are a little bit slower to come back than the fans are, especially the publishers, and especially the big brands that were almost looking for an off ramp. Right, that they felt like they were doing San Diego in particular, and also New York, because they felt like they had to. Because if they didn't, and their competitors were there, everybody was going to miss them, and everybody's going to be like, like why is Sony here and Microsoft isn't, or like that sort of thing for those events. And now they, these booths cost millions of dollars. Sending the staff there. A lot of these companies are short staffed in the first place, or they got rid of their event people during the pandemic, and so they just don't have the capacity to be at it. So the machinery is a little rusty. They're like turning it on to full power, and you can hear it creaking, and you can like see the smoke coming out of certain places, and it's just going to take a little while, I think, for it to get back to the level that it was.
Yeah, we need to kick the TV a couple times to get reception as clear as it used to be. I understand. And yeah, I want to build on that. I'm going to acknowledge that Chip Mosier is watching us. Don't worry, Chip. He wants to make sure we talk about the Harveys. I absolutely want to talk about the Harveys, Chip. I'm glad you're watching. That's great, man. And we're due for a new talk if you're up to it, Chip. So that's great to see. Well, you're right. And again, prior to COVID, DC was adjusting, and Warner Brothers, and at the time, I don't remember who was owning, and I don't mean that as a wise ass crack, but I don't remember who held the purse strings. But I know, talking to DC people, how expensive the old DC booth was. And like you said, they've cut back on staff. And we even saw prior to COVID that all of a sudden it was just a couple seats at the Warner Brothers table, for example, at San Diego, and that kind of minimal presence. And I don't know if it'll come back. And I think a lot of that depends on when the dust eventually, in specifics of DC, whenever whoever takes over and decides that they need to put that kind of money behind that sort of promotion. And really, I mean, DC is really in flux. We saw that. It's Kevin. Is it Kevin Harada? I forget who.
Yeah.
The guy, yeah. Okay.
Walter Harada, I think.
All right, Walter. Excuse me. Yes, and the current DC head is leaving This is his last day, and they've, the new guys in place. It's very interesting, especially with Black Adam coming out next week. And that right now there's no central plan as far as films go. The Arrowverse is winding down, with the exception of shows like Superman and Lois, and Stargirl, of course, currently up and running. But yeah, it is interesting on the DC side. I give Marvel a lot of credit for again having so much in the pipeline, and I mean Disney, as you know, was bleeding money during COVID because of the lack of ability of the parks not being open and the cruises and all they do in terms
Right.
of public events and that kind of public programming and stuff.
And
And
it's easy to forget also how big a part ESPN is of that. And if there's no sports stuff, that makes it tough also. So in both of these cases, there's like, these are gigantic companies with a lot of moving parts. In the case of DC and Warner Brothers, like Warner Brothers has become this kind of weird hot potato that these companies are passing back and forth. And I don't know why. There isn't a buyer that sees the huge value of it, but I think AT&T, which was the previous owner, they kind of bought them almost because they were afraid not to, because they did, like they were looking around at what Comcast was doing with Universal, and like the acquisitions that were being made is around networks allying with content companies and vice versa, and they didn't want to be out in the cold, even though that's not their business and they didn't really know what to do with it, and they never knew what to do with it from day one, and they happened to be a very heavily indebted company even before they made the purchase, so it didn't make the financial picture better. And like, you don't buy a company like that and expect it to make money on day one, just from the way it just seemed like a impossible situation that Warner Brothers leadership was put in, and DC just being kind of the weird stepchild in the Warner stack anyway. And now they've moved on to Discovery, and for a minute it seemed like Discovery was going to be more see the value of what they had with that. And I think that moment is past. And I think the I don't know what the management idea is there, but I think it's probably worth more to them somewhere else than it is as part of their
I
company.
guess,
So,
yeah,
I mean, we've been talking about different stuff. So DC and Warner Brothers is its own weird thing. The thing about Marvel and Disney is that when Disney acquired Marvel, it made Ike Perlmutter this single largest shareholder in Disney. So the owner of Marvel has a seat on the board at Disney. And so Marvel is going to get heard. And Marvel Studios is, of course, an extremely important part of the money-making end of Disney. So Marvel within Disney has a much more secure place and a much larger megaphone and seat at the table than these guys. So, their corporate situations are a little bit different. Maybe DC and Warner Brothers is going to end up somewhere where that will be the case for them, but it's hard to say.
yeah, everything's in flux at DC, and it's interesting. AT&T was always more of a delivery system rather than content creators. It reminds me of Sony PlayStation, when for a hot minute they dabbled in live action programming, the way that Netflix and a lot of the early streamers were. And you'll remember, of course, that Brent Bendis's Powers TV show started
Yep.
as a Sony PlayStation product. There were a couple other things that were in development, and that's why. So it didn't surprise me when AT&T is like, "Well, yeah, we're really not in the content making business." In the case of Discovery, my comment always was, "Well, they are a company. All their content is do it yourself stuff, and especially that they were already in the content business. That they understood the value of cookbooks and do-it-yourself books based on their stars." And I'm like, all right, well then, maybe they would see the value of DC Comics along with all the, licensed properties and everything, the IPs that are being exploited on TV and film. But again,
And maybe they do, but they're just not in a financial position to make those kind of forward-leaning decisions right now. This is a tough market, as you may have noticed,
oh yeah,
and it's like things are an awful lot different. And you were talking at the beginning about how the pandemic, expanded the viewership. It was kind of a two-edged sword because it also put the kibosh on a lot of production. And so, one of the things that shook out of the DC, and Warner Brothers merger was these shows, that just vanished, like Batgirl. it was
The movie.
apparently done and ready to go,
Yeah.
and they killed it. And I had a
Yeah.
very interesting conversation. I wrote a story about this because there was a lot of speculation about why that happened, and it's like, what was it? Because they didn't like the demographic they were going after, or that the story didn't fit with the thing. And my source, who knows about this stuff and has actually been through a couple of these things, pointed out that there's a financial moment when you merge a company that you can just stick a whole bunch of fixed costs into this, basically a burn bag of merger related expenses, and then it goes off the books. You don't have to worry about it, and any project that's not a guaranteed moneymaker is going to go in there. So I was, I guess, kind of surprised with Batgirl because it seemed like a reasonable franchise extension to me. Honestly, the one that really surprised me is the Bruce Timm animated Batman series that was greenlit and was going forward. And in my personal opinion, nobody gets the DC universe quite like Bruce Timm. Like, his vision that he put out through all of those animated shows and stuff like that is just such a compelling, interesting take on the brand. And it's narratively rich, it's complicated, it's visually cool, and it's not like gratuitously dark and terrible. It's just like things that those of us who grew up with DC like about DC. So here you've got a Batman revival of a beloved series by the guy that was doing it, that's already under production. It's like, of all things, why would you? That's like core Batman. That's the main thing. That's not some Batman family. That's Main Street. And it's like, wow, that's um, you know, it's I guess it's tough to sell an animated original series right now. But man,
Well,
that was
we'll
a tough
see.
one.
We'll see what's happening with that, because the headline was obviously it's not going to wind up at HBO Max. But as you read the story, they
Yeah,
are
yeah.
they are still going through. And in fact, I'll even promote at some point in early November, maybe the second week of November, I'll be talking to Ed Brubaker, who is the head writer of that Cape Crusader Batman series, and we'll hopefully he'll be able to tell me a little bit more of what's going on. Not only Bruce Timm and Ed, but also James Tucker, who I think has been an exceptional successor to Bruce Timm on all the animated
Yes.
movies and things. And James is a buddy and everything. So yeah, I root for him and Ed as buddies, and Bruce has always been nice to me as well. Interesting comments I've got already in the chat, and this from Chip Mosier. He says direct market publishers seem to have overlearned the lesson of COVID. They saw that they could make money not doing trade shows, so they stopped. But fans are hungry for direct interaction, and I feel this move away from setting up at shows will be seen as a huge misstep in a couple of years. Manga, animated dominated NYCC, and only IDW had big booths, I guess, in New York, so we'll see. And then Tyler says Warner Brothers during the pandemic was releasing movies the same day in movie theaters, and HBO Max that didn't go well. I hear you, and that's all. And my point
Yeah.
in bringing up the acceleration of COVID was, yes, the viewership increased at home, but also that, like I said, the trend was already there to stay away from the theaters. But like you said about Batman or rather Batgirl, and these decisions as companies are merging of what to cut and what to keep and things, and also, I mean, my God, they pulled back on DC Universe when it was streaming and kind of dumped their assets in
Yeah.
HBO Max. But I mean, we see the headlines every week with HBO Max. They are trimming already
Yeah.
established programming to save money on licensing or whatever. So yeah, there's these like little nip and tucks that are still happening.
Yeah, I mean, they're a buoy on the ocean, and it's like the stuff that's moving them around is not is largely not within their control. And I honestly salute them for continuing to put out good books. I think they're
Oh
maintaining
yeah.
high quality across the line. I think their stuff with they took a pretty radical step on distribution, controversial step, and they weren't afraid to do that because they didn't like what they saw going on at Diamond and stuff like that. So I think
Yep.
DC, the people that are actually trying to get the comics out, are doing the best they can to just keep their heads down and serve the readers and serve the retailers, until they hear otherwise. And that's kind of all you can do. I want to talk to Chip, who is of course wise and correct in all things. I would point out that there was also a Marvel booth there, although it was co-sponsored by Veve, which is their NFT partner. But it's interesting because the people that ironically, the largest booth at Emerald City was Oni, which is not what you would call a business success story at the moment.
Yeah, they're in flux too. You're right.
And and it's like, I mean, Seattle is right up the road from Portland, and it's like it would not be a big deal. And Dark Horse is usually at that show, and yeah, Marvel Studios booth, correct.
Yeah, Chip
Uh,
wants to put the qualifier, but that, as we know, and Chip knows as well, that's been the case for almost 15 years now. In terms of Marvel as a publisher, has kind of taken a couple steps
yeah.
back, and really, it is under the umbrella of Marvel Studios that they've been operating since Iron Man and subsequent movies and TV.
But it's like when Dark Horse and Image and guys like that in that tier, because I mean, it's like the fixed points in the universe are like, DC and Marvel, and then if you're into manga, it's Viz, and if you're into kid stuff, it's Scholastic. Like those four are not going anywhere, and everybody else is getting kind of crumbs off the table from that, or they're trying. It's like maybe there's 15 or 20% available market share outside of that, that group. And the companies that are angling for that are really in flux right now. So when you don't have a Dark Horse or an Image or a IDW or a Dynamite or somebody like that, and Dynamite doesn't usually set up at these shows that much either, that makes more room for like the Aftershock and Mad Cave and Vault and those kind of companies that are trying to make a name for themselves.
Yeah,
they're doing some interesting books. They're discovering some talent. Like, I mean, if you're into Ram V stuff, like he started on Vault with an amazing series called These Savage Shores.
yes,
So
indeed.
right, so they're an important part of the ecosystem in discovering this talent and bringing it forward. And so the health of those companies is, it's like the plankton, the plankton
Right.
dies and the whales die, right? So you need to keep that going, and the kind of churn that's been going on with the people, it's like this sort of musical chairs of who's going where, and like Mike Martz went from Aftershock to Mad Cave, and Chris Ryle was doing some stuff after IDW, is now at Aftershock, and
Clover Press has a bunch of people, former DC and other people as well, and IDW people.
Yeah, and then I just saw, now that Quesada's on the loose, he's not only doing stuff for DC. I just saw a thing that he's going to be doing some covers for Bad Idea.
Bad Idea, yes.
Right. I mean, Bad Idea, love him or hate him, they're definitely like making some noise. They're investing.
Sure.
They're investing in their comic product, and they're kind of leaning into their niche. And I've talked to Dinesh about this, and I'm like, there's only room for one company in the industry that's doing what you're doing, and you're it. So you don't like,
Well, isn't it interesting though? And this came out over the summer, and they also made announcements at New York. Frank Miller Presents is.
Oh, yeah, that was another one I was going to say. Yeah,
yeah. And
Ideo is going into business with Frank, and
right, and that's the thing. And I had a panel with Dan at Terrificon in Connecticut, and then he came on the show here and kind of expanded on that. And I find it interesting. And as you mentioned, Bad Idea and Frank Miller Presents sticking with paper only and not releasing digital products. And have you had a chance to talk to Dinesh about that kind of marketing and why?
Yeah, I mean, he's a collector and a big time, art and old comics nerd himself, and he totally understands what gets that side of the industry and that side of the market excited, and he's just having a blast with it. But he's partly serious because I think the books are interesting. He's got top quality creators,
absolutely,
and all of this stuff, and the buttons he's pushing with the retailers and stuff like that. It's just like pass the popcorn. It's fun to watch. So more power to him.
No, and again, but I have to admit, in my own consumer actions, that I am consuming more. I mean, I'm still grabbing paper books and graphic novels, but I'm also reading a hell of a lot more digital than ever before. From the convenience standpoint, it looks nice on my tablet, and I also, it's a good place to sample ideas that I necessarily don't want to have clutter my, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but obviously, magazines and graphic novels start to stack up, and so that's why I choose digital. And it's interesting that both in the case of Frank Miller Presents and Bad Idea, that these are, established names. And certainly in the case of Frank, leaning on his established works like Ronin and Sin City and things like that. And of course, Frank's got the name where it's like, well, if it's a new Frank Miller thing, yeah, I'm interested. But bad idea. David Lapham and Matt Kint,
Yeah.
great names and stuff. But it's like, yeah, do I want to sample that stuff? And again, if I have to go to the store to do it.
But if there's 25% of the market, of the direct market or more that wants that, and you can get like 90% of that 25%, that's, like those numbers are enough to keep a press like that in business. And while we're talking about digital, since I know Chip is listening, I also want to acknowledge, in terms of bringing new talent into the biz, that the imprint that he did for Comixology Originals,
Absolutely.
Continuing to produce, good stuff, and as you can get it in print with Dark Horse. So what's going on the creative side with all of this ferment of these, certainly Amazon is not a small press, but they're more part of that side of the business, let's say, than not in where they are in the comics ecosystem, I guess. It's really great for readers because it's like discovering new talent and getting this stuff in, and as long as the creators are getting paid and as long as there's enough space on the shelf that retailers aren't going broke trying to order all of these books, which is, sometimes a problem.
Right.
That's the market expanded 60% from 2020 to 2021, according to my employer.
Forbes.
Yeah, no. According to my employer, Milton Greep at ICV2.
Okay, sure.
Milton does the market sizing.
That's true. He's crunching the numbers. You're absolutely right.
Right. So just a couple of years ago, we were celebrating that comics is a $1 billion business. Now it's a $2 billion business in North America, which is great news. Even if a lot of it is trade books, even if a lot of it is stuff for kids and manga, the market is growing, the audience is growing. So, good news.
Agreed. And as you say, these up and comers, God, and I'll even confess, when I first heard about Mad Cave, and it was an online show that I was helping put together, and it's like, oh, Mad Cave wants a bunch of solo panels. I'm like, I don't even know what Mad Cave is. And now, not only Mike Mart's jumping over there as EIC, but also, again, their product is great. Source Point Press, a lot of good product. A lot of these companies that I hadn't heard of or were barely on the radar to me 3 years ago, I give them all credit. TKO, all the, Vault has certainly, shown us. And I mean, Aftershock is a sponsor of Word Balloon, and it's great to hear how well they're doing. Here, Chip's got some numbers for us. 67% increase in indie comic sale in the first quarter of this year. That's amazing. Again, and like you said, and it's funny because I remember this 15 years ago, just purely a writing standpoint, where Marvel would have a new writer work together with a more established writer. I mean, that's how Fraction came into the door at Marvel. That's how Rick Remender came into the door at Marvel, partnering with senior writers. John Hickman was writing with Bendis, things like that. And now we're seeing it, like you said, where we'll have a name creator like Chip Mosier, and Chip's bringing in Jason Liu and his his artist on one of his Comixology books, for example. And there's a lot of those where you'll know one name and then, and we're introducing this person on the art side or on the writing side. So no, it's very encouraging that things are going as well as they are. And that's a positive that I do think being locked down kind of ignited a lot of people's interest of, I haven't read a comic book in a while. Let me see what's going on right now. And that's been wonderful. And and also we were talking about that concern of the early days of COVID about stores surviving during the pandemic and finding a way to do it.
Yeah. And unfortunately my store didn't make it through, and that has diminished my enjoyment of the comics buying experience considerably. I just, it's like I go to other stores when I need to get something, but I just don't feel like I'm they don't know my name at the bar,
Right. Right.
And that's an important and unique and cool thing about comics. And it's the resilience of the independent retailer community is just stunning. And now we're seeing a new generation that's starting to come up as well. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
But while we're on the topic of this sort of new talent pipeline, One of the things I've really had my eye on for a while, and I did a whole bunch of panels about this at New York, is user-generated content. So when you look at Webtoon, and when we talk about these numbers, right? So Webtoon, we look at a $2 billion US comics market all up. That's, print, digital, trade books, kids, manga, everything. Webtoon worldwide, and they're based out of South Korea, their revenues last year were close to $1 billion. And when you add up all of the sales of their ancillary stuff, according to David Lee, their VP that I talked to at the ICV2 conference, they're up at about 50%. Their worldwide numbers are 50% of all comics sold in North America, and their top moving books are, their top series are selling like enormous. You look at, for example, the DC Batman book, the Wayne family thing that they're doing with Webtoon. Right?
Yes.
Do you know what kind of numbers that's doing?
Talk to me.
According to them, 2 million plus paid subscribers and tens of millions of views of each episode that are not, they're just read for free. When's the last time a Batman book sold 2 million copies?
Yeah. I mean, I know we would celebrate 6-figure sales, let alone millions and stuff. No, Jim Lee, in the case of Marvel, Jim Lee's X-Men back in the day and Chris Claremont, I don't know.
I mean, it's apples to oranges at a certain degree, but that's a lot of eyeballs reading Batman comics.
100%, man.
And it's more people than are going into the comic shop, and
yes.
the opportunity now is to convert those people into, and have some titles that can move, that audience, which is like the Webtoon audience is something like 65% female. It's something like 80% under 25 or something like, I mean, like their demographics are not DC's demographics. So the fact that Webtoon readers are reading a DC property or an Archie property or properties from these creators that are on Webtoon, that's really cool. But the other thing about Webtoon is that there's the 20% of that professional level creator, and then there's the 80% of user-generated content that they have that is basically people doing their own comics and putting them up there. Instead of like going to fanzines or mini comics or stuff like that, they're going straight to digital. And maybe they start out with 10, their friends are reading it.
Sure.
And then they can build an audience. And then as they grow the audience, they can start to monetize. And, they're not making, quit your job FU money. They're making, like beer money. But okay, that, and then
start.
That's how it starts.
Absolutely, man.
And every line they draw, they're getting better. And every one of these strips that they do, they're getting better. And the people that they're recruiting, or the people that are stepping up to do this, are people that might not get past the gatekeepers, at the traditional editorial level. And so there's a really interesting new generation that's coming out of that. And I think there's all kinds of, the success of Webtoon is not gone unnoticed, let's put it that way. And I think a lot of people are kind of looking at that model. I know I'm working with a company that's looking at that model for other kinds of media, for example. So lots of stuff.
Man, Chip is coming through with comments and questions. We appreciate it, Chip. Did you, Rob, ever find out what quantifies as a view by Webtoons?
Not specifically. Their metrics they claim their metrics are so granular. They measure dwell time on the pages, and they have insight in when a new character is introduced, how that impacts readership. So I don't know exactly what their views are. They're claiming something like 100 million unique visitors a month or something. So, to people like Chip, who have worked professionally in the world of digital comics for 10 years, that stuff probably has a lot more meaning. But for the rest of us, they're very large numbers.
Well, and again, I mean, this is like
even if 20% of it is fake, it's still a big number.
I hear what you're saying, and yeah, isn't it interesting, because having this conversation with TV and film people that work with the streamers, that the streamers are they keep their cards close to the vest when it comes to the numbers and things, and they only promote numbers when it benefits them. Unlike coming from broadcasting and Nielsen ratings and Arbitron ratings back in the day with radio, they had to put that out for advertisers to know what they were buying and everything. And but even now, even the broadcast world has gotten very territorial. And if you don't subscribe to Nielsen, you don't have access to the numbers. I have a buddy who's an old-time television and radio critic here in Chicago who used to have people be able to slip them the numbers over the transom and everything. That doesn't happen anymore because they're getting very militant about.
Well, they know they're just not telling you. And by the way, it's not just that. It's like try getting sales numbers out of our brave new fragmented distribution system. It's like before those diamond sales charts would tell you most of the story that you need to know, and now it's not at all straightforward. And you've got these number crunchers like Milton and John Jackson Miller that are going through all of this and doing their magic and trying to figure this stuff out. But it's very opaque. But one thing on the measurement side that's really interesting, and this is another part of the Webtoon effect, and I'm sure they were doing this at Amazon too. These digital platforms where they have this information, they know all kinds of things about the readership demographics when they're doing it, how they respond to different storylines and things like that. And that informs what kind of larger media projects get greenlit and where the legs are for licensing. So Webtoon, because Webtoon genres don't line up to traditional comic genres. So Webtoon does a lot of action and fantasy and stuff like that, but they also do a lot of slice of life. They do a lot of romantic comedy. They do a lot of straight up romance. And they know exactly who these readers are, and they know like the inner workings of that fan base. Now, in the first 20 years of the media comics era, starting with like 2000 X-Men and Spider-Man and stuff like that, the metric was you show up at Comic-Con and you look around and you say, geez, look at all these fans, and they're all into this kind of stuff. I'll bet if we give these guys red meat, they're going to show up at our opening weekend. They're going to help us make our numbers. Romantic comedy, well, we know there's an audience out there, but we don't know exactly who they are. And we don't know quite as much about what makes them tick as we do about these guys. So I think a lot of the decision-making on the studios, when it wasn't just like the old boy network and saying, oh, I've always wanted to make a, Guardians of the Galaxy movie, so we're going to do that. A lot of it, was based on the audience that was measurable to them. Now that you've got these other platforms that are working in these different genres, they can go to the studios and say, you know what, like there's a real audience for this, like office workplace, romantic comedy thing. Because, like Let's Play has 28 million views, or like large number of subscribers as a Webtoon. And, it's the kind of property that might not get us at too long of a look, because it's like, okay, but to be able to substantiate,
what is new about what Webtoons is selling compared to what we sell every week shows you, sure.
And say, well, yeah, except we know exactly who these people are, and we can like point them at this stuff. We can sell them merch. We can do all of this other stuff, and we've got a whole machine built on the back end that will support that. That changes the dynamic for Hollywood decision makers, and I think it's going to open the door. We've been trying to get the door open for more diverse kinds of content, appealing to more diverse audiences, better representation in front of and behind the camera, all of that stuff. And Hollywood won't take the risk unless they think it's a sure thing, and hard numbers are the closest thing to a sure thing. And so that's what it's going to take to change the conversation, and that's a real benefit.
I'm sure you saw it recently. There's and Chip, Wesley, I'm going to get to your comment because I think it's great as well. But while we're on this subject, Chip says boy love is huge in the Webtoon space. I'm assuming, is that male gay love? Is that what boy love is?
So it's a genre that is very popular in Japan of like young men romantic stuff, and it overlaps into other categories. I'm not an expert in this, but I mean, I was actually working with a company that was trying to bring this stuff to the US a couple of years ago, and I thought, well, maybe there's a market, but it's not the same market. So in Japan, this stuff is mostly read by adult women. That's the audience for the yaoi manga.
So is it hetero and gay? I'm just trying to understand the definition.
No, it's gay. So it's same-sex male-to-male attraction of these like cute young men.
Sure.
But the readers of it in Japan are largely women.
Interesting.
I'm not sure who the readers are here, I would presume
Well,
there's some women and there's some gay men, and I mean, it's just like our culture is a little bit different. So I think that the
absolutely.
way this stuff is perceived in the United States, but it's an interesting point. I mean, it is a fast growing, and there's a ton of content that's been produced over the years in Japan, where it's like it's a go business. Like people are super into it. So
Hey, there is a male a romantic comedy that is out right now, and I don't remember the title. I'm so sorry, everybody. But uh, that the studios did kind of put their stock in and made this movie, expecting it to have a much bigger mainstream reception. It didn't happen, and so that's why I wanted to point to Chip's comment and say, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is they were really, kind of counting. Yes, Bros. Thank you, Chip. Absolutely. That is the title of the movie. Thank you, man. I haven't seen it. I don't know other than the good buzz critically that it got and everything. But it's getting indie movie numbers in terms
yeah.
of box office, and they were kind of surprised. So that's the thing. And as you say, just because it works, and certainly it works from a Japanese standpoint and a reading standpoint, yeah, it's not necessarily a guarantee to translate into a TV or film thing. And again, this is new territory, and I applaud the Hollywood studio for taking a chance on Bros. And we'll see. Hopefully, this will be one of those things that gathers interest as time goes on. There certainly is an actual audience out there as far as population and stuff, but
And
it's
I
growing.
think that the digital direct to consumer model is right for stuff like that, because you don't have to get through the retailer to place an order for it, even if they think that they might have a customer base or something like that. We're in kind of culturally fraught times right now, and
Yes,
in some
yes,
places having that stuff on the shelf gets you attention that you don't want or need,
I agree.
and just the chilling effect of that, which is deplorable. And
Well, it's
I
disappointing, absolutely, and it is
yeah,
deplorable.
I mean,
I agree with you.
it's terrible that this is a factor in people's decisions, because people should read what they want. But the reality is, if you can get this stuff on an app or whatever, and the people that are interested can read it, the material can find the audience, the community can find one another. That's the best you can hope for there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and again, God, Chip, seriously, man, I almost feel like I got to pay you for this episode. I appreciate the comments and the questions that you're asking. Wesley brings up, and we all
Yeah.
remember Zuda, which came from DC, and wants to know, was DC ahead of its time with Zuda? Would they have never reached the numbers achieved by Webtoons? What do you think, Rob?
There's a word for people that are right at the wrong time. Is they're wrong. It's like, as a futurist, I've got plenty of arrows in my back on stuff that I was prematurely enthusiastic about, let's say. So I mean, Zuda was an interesting idea. Like, all of this stuff is like, it's a cool idea and it's a proof of concept, and like like there were a bunch of other digital platforms that were
Sure.
out there that were actually more interesting to talk about than they were to use, and that like their prime product was thought leadership around, like, oh, like, let's do something with AR. It's like, okay, that's cool, but you know when the rubber hits the road, do people really want to um uh,
That bonus content, yeah.
yeah,
Do we
that
need
extra
that
stuff. It's like,
that
yeah,
way?
do we really want that, or do we really just want the good story,
Right.
and the rest of it is extraneous? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that was part of that. Like, I was briefly part of this project on, like, tokenized storytelling, which was kind of a
Yes.
weird implementation of NFTs, and I thought, this is kind of interesting, as a model. And then all the naysayers who said, like, the crypto stuff is a house of cards, that turned out to be the smart bet. So what do I know?
Well, again, when you're in the case of Zuda, the book on digital comics was still being written, and the rules and what people wanted and didn't want. I applaud DC for putting the resources into it. I think a lot of interesting content and creators came out of it and are still active today on other platforms. But yeah,
I mean, the
unfortunately,
game changer was the iPad, right? Because that's actually
yes,
looks and feels like a comic book. So reading on your phone, I mean, the thing that Webtoons has done is
it's
they've actually made an experience of reading on your phone bearable. Because you're not going panel to panel, page to page. You're just scrolling, and it actually changes, and it is actually creating real problems for taking Webtoon material and putting it into books, because the people doing it aren't thinking about how this lays out on the page. They're not thinking about how do I get you to turn the page by putting something cool in the bottom right panel. They're not thinking in terms of pacing and cliffhangers or any of that stuff. They're just trying to get you to the next panel each time. And the people that are doing print versions of this stuff are really having to make some changes. And conversely, the people that are experienced top shelf grade A, panel and page comic creators come to Webtoon and they're like, why isn't this working? And doesn't
I do.
always work.
Absolutely, man. Well, and again, I try to share my phone, but of course, I got my lights off. But you have the panel space of essentially a baseball. There you go, a baseball card, and that was always my concern in the early days of digital comics. I would talk to people like Alex DeCampi that was having success digitally before the iPad, and I'm like, what's going to happen to the splash page? Like you said, what happens to that, oh my god, the last panel on a page, and then you flip it over and the surprise. I'm like, storytelling is changing. And yeah, man, it's I always quote John Hickman, who said comic books are on the same shelf for different reasons, and you could say same thing about the physical product versus the digital product. And it is a different form of storytelling. It's very, very interesting.
What's the thing is with that Batman Webtoon book, Webtoon is licensing that from DC. Specifically, they're doing a Webtoon version of it with Webtoon creators. They're not taking like like Batman straight up and trying to move it over. And I think that was a
Right.
very smart decision, because they recognize differences not just in the audience but in the format.
Yeah.
So
No, it's a different animal. 100%, man. And again, see, Rob, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I knew you would have a handle on this. And also as an observer, you're directly talking to the webtoon people as much as you're talking to the physical publishers. Very interesting stuff. I do want to hear more, like where was Chip leading us when he asked about the Harveys?
so the Harvey Awards happened at New York Comic Con. So for the last couple of years, they've been trying to stand up the Harvey Awards, because it sort of moved over from Baltimore, and
Yes.
that New York is the right place for it. It's a you know big stage, and
Yeah.
Harvey Kurtzman, important creator, Harvey Awards, long venerable history, and good to have an alternative to the Eisners, both
Yes.
in sensibility and in the show format and in all of that stuff. So this year they had it in the big room upstairs at the Javits Center, that was good in some ways, and you know had its issues, like everything at the Javits Center. But
Yeah. Yeah.
fundamentally, it felt like a big stage. It was a well-produced event. Neil Gaiman was there. That was cool. The presenters were good. They got through the ceremony, before everybody was dead for the night.
Sure,
The
that's
bar
always
was
the
still
Eisner
open.
issue. Right.
So always good. And it was also a great crowd, because I think this is the first time there was maybe 150, 200 industry pros in there, and people that hadn't seen each other in a long time, hadn't seen each other in person in a long time. I posted a great picture of two of my favorite editors from the 80s, when I was like big time into this stuff, which was Karen Berger and Annie Nesenti. And like they were, like I posted this picture, and it probably got like hundreds of likes on Facebook. It's like my most active post, because it's like I guess both of them have a lot of friends, but
Ha!
it was just like super cool to be able to see that
Yeah.
interaction. And it's like you feel the thaw, and everything coming back to life and everything. So it was a good event, and the books that they honored were on point. I mean, it was interesting. Some added some stuff to my reading list to go and check out. So yeah.
Are the awards streaming? Are they on that new platform that Reed has, that is a news website themselves? Pop First, the Pop First. Can you see? The recording of the.
Ask Chip. I don't
All
know.
right, all right. I hear you.
Imagine so. If they're streaming stuff, that would be a thing for them to stream. But
And by the way, I totally agree with Chip that obviously when it comes to digital comics, the game changer was iPad and also Comixology.
yes,
100%,
yes.
Chip.
Yep.
Absolutely, man. And your successor over there, Mr. Gold, is I think doing a good job. So, okay, Chip says that the Harveys will be on Pop First soon. I love that.
It's worth it for some of the acceptance speeches because they were great. Of course, Neil was great, but one of the Hall of Fame inductees was so the creator of Little Lulu, Marjorie Henderson Buell, was inducted, and her son Paul accepted the award. And it's always a highlight at these things when they get one of these old time people and they find a relative that's like, like, we never knew what grandpa was doing, or in this case, mom was doing up in the attic all those times that she wasn't there when we were growing up. And it's like, oh my God, she touched the lives of all of these people or created this character that's stood up 100 years later. And just having that, so it was very, very from the heart thing. So if you're a fan of comics or you just like, a heartstring moment, good stuff.
Well, I co-produced last year's Ringo Awards for Baltimore, and we streamed it online. And it was, like you said, a lot of great acceptance speeches, a great keynote address as well for my buddy Steve Rotterdam from Aftershock.
Oh yes.
The previous year, Jeff Johns did the keynote when we had it all online, and it was an education producing that. In fact, I was talking to my buddy Chad Ramson, who is out of Pittsburgh, but he and I really did a lot of online events during lockdown, and it was very nice of Baltimore to invite us to do the live streaming physically in Baltimore and stuff. So no, I look forward to watching it on Pop First when they post it. Ed Cato also wants to. Oh, he wishes he saw the Little Lulu acceptance speech. Well, I imagine it'll be there on the Popverse presentation. Also, man, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. I'm certainly going to do it to go to Forbes. I want to see your interview with the Webtoons guy.
Yeah, that's on ICV2, and that was
okay.
Yeah, that's I recommend it because it's very informative. He talked a lot about some of these numbers, and even if, and you probably should take the most extreme numbers with a grain of salt, they're doing all right. And although, an interesting thing over the weekend, I saw a news thing come across. So Webtoon is owned by Naver, which is big Korean company, and their competitor Kakao. So basically, one of these companies is like Google plus Amazon plus Microsoft, and the other company is like, Apple plus, everybody else. Like, so they're these gigantic competitors, and they compete on a bunch of different things. Kakao bought Tapas, which was an American-founded Webtoon-ish platform.
Yes.
A year or two ago for an eye-watering amount of money, like $500 million, 520 million or something like that. So both Naver and Kakao, their servers are in this secure facility in South Korea. And there was some kind of technical glitch at this facility that knocked both of these guys out of commission over the weekend, which is kind of troublesome. Like, that's
Sure.
Sure. I mean, the Webtoon business is a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of their stuff. I mean, they do search, and they do mobile games, and they do all kinds of different things. But just we live in a fragile world.
I was going to say the fragility of the grid. Absolutely, man. That's those of us in the know are kind of always dumping in our pants and worried about something like that. The average consumer, until that light gets shut off and isn't coming back on. I mean, good Lord, the times that my Wi-Fi is out when they're rewiring or something like that. Shame on us for becoming so dependent on the digital world. Because it's like, what do I do with myself? I don't know what to do with myself. And I have so many friends that have been going to cons like New York and the like, that with all the airline problems and stuff, have been stuck in terminals for hours. And, thank God I have my tablet. Thank God I have my laptop. I could watch something. I could read something. And it's like, yeah, man, those days when you'd bring a couple paperbacks or even hardbacks in your bag so you'd have something to read should there be a delay. it's like you don't know. And again, the fragility of the grid, absolutely, that is very, very concerning. Wesley says, I'm a data engineer supporting an analytics group, dashboards and presentations. Any chance your tech books can assist us in delivering to a multi-generational audience that skews 50 plus in age?
Dude, are you like a plant or something? I like, so at this moment, in addition to all of the other weird stuff that I'm doing, I'm actually working on a project for AARP on designing technology that is age friendly for 50 up. Like that is literally like was on my desk
That's
this morning.
great.
So, yeah. So and another weird piece of trivia is that the very first book I wrote is a book called Generation Blend: Managing Across the Technology Age Gap. So I am technically a subject matter expert in this thing, although I'm not sure I want to use your word balloon time for that topic. But wow, I'm sorry, put the question itself up again. Like what was
Yeah,
it?
no problem here. Because I'm glad you were able to kind of get the gist of where he was going. But essentially, uh, can the tech companies assist us in delivering a multi-generational audience that
Right.
skews so maybe a
The
single
answer to that
product.
question is professional services from me. So send me an email or something, or tweet at me on this link at Rob Salk, and we can talk about that offline.
But I'm
Thank
glad.
you, Wesley. That's a cool question.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up AARP because again, you and I are starting to take advantage of the coupons and some of
Oh,
the other things
jeez.
that they provide. But that said, a good friend of mine who's in library sciences was always telling me in my early days of podcasting, he said the biggest barrier you're going to have is the grandma factor when it comes to grandma understanding, how to work a Zoom call, how to work Skype back in the day. These
Yeah,
other things that are, now depending on your age and your willingness to learn, you've
yeah.
got it.
Well,
You've
I'm
got
here to tell you there's 16,000 words worth of best practices around every aspect of technology development to help make that process simpler. And the one of the more interesting things, there's lots of market research. Like before, the way that people were designing that was designing low featured versions of stuff that would be simpler to use. And all of the research shows that older consumers don't want like products that lack functionality. They want full featured products that are easy to use. That's your job if you're designing this stuff. So that's
okay. And I mean,
weird tangent, but
well, no, no, no. And honestly, I'll bring it back to what we're talking about
yeah,
because you point out the webtoon audience, its age and its sexual demographics and all, or gender demographics. But that said, are people, I mean, DC always gets the knock. Well, you know what DC stands for? Dad's Comics, and I get that. And again, as I start to enter my pre-senior citizen years in my late 50s, Calvin Reed of Publishers Weekly. I love the fact that Calvin is about 10 years older than me and still gets excited about comic books and
oh,
is
he'll bury
still
us all. Yeah, yeah.
and it's such a great guy. And I really appreciate that he's got that vibe. Well, I am the beginning of that generation. I don't consider myself Gen X. I feel like I'm the last year of the boomers. My dad was a 1946 enlistee in the army and dealt with the occupation,
Huh.
the immediate post World War II period. So, and I was his youngest kid. So I identify a bit more with the boomer audience. As I mean, again, I was born in December of '64, so
So
that's why.
whoever can make uh, webtoon for seniors or something like that,
Yeah.
that is a multi-billion-dollar market. Like that is a really good opportunity if you can crack that, because there's no reason that you can't. It's just that right now the technology skews really young, and it's just a matter of marketing ambiance and stuff like that. But yeah, I think there really is an interesting opportunity there. The problem is that, like I think a lot of the stories that DC and Marvel and traditional comic companies tell are really tied to the format. They're really tied to the look and the page and everything, and you can rethink it for, you can think about it differently. But one of the things about reading the webtoons is you don't want as much detail in the panel, for example, whereas in comics it's almost like some of these guys are paid by the line. It's like you want to sit there and look at that luxurious rendering and the beautiful
Yes.
deep coloring and all of the stuff that's going on, and even more so with graphic novels. You want that book to be like this permanent, beautiful thing. So, you do it. It's an interesting opportunity.
Well, I just want to, because I think it's a nice compliment to you and me that Wesley says that no, he's not a plant. He looked up who you were and saw your past work, and as he knows, word balloon goes wherever I want it to. John wanted. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Well, Rob, when we were texting back and forth about doing this, it's like you're like, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I'm not worried. I'm like, I knew, and truly. Well, Rob, it's your expertise in the things that you cover and the information that you uncover, and I know. And I really appreciate Wesley, because I know my audience is interested in this stuff beyond what we read, beyond who's going to win a fight, the Hulk or Thor. I'm there in that comic book store conversation, and I'm happy to give my 2 cents. But as I keep saying to everybody, the landscape is changing under our feet. We are standing and the earth is quaking beneath us. And all these different shifts in the market, whether it's publishing or live action or animation or games, everything, it's in constant flux. And I am very curious what everybody who is watching this stuff, what are we all thinking? What do we see? And you're a great forecaster of trends and where things could potentially go and where they do go.
Well, I think in putting on my trend watching, thank you for that. Putting on my trend watching thing, I mean, what we're heading, like, indubitably, you don't need a crystal ball to see that we're heading into a set of market conditions that we haven't seen in about 10 years, right? So things are like, over the last, while all this stuff has been happening, like when I wrote my Comic-Con book, which was 2011, 2012, we're just coming out of that, and we were looking at this road ahead, and I was saying, like, there's going to be all this media, and the cons are going to get big, and like all of this stuff, like, like that we were going to start on a conveyor belt of that big media, big technology, marketing, all of these powers that be, we're going to start looking at what's going on in comics and say, wait a minute, you guys have gotten all of this stuff that we're trying to do right, when nobody was looking. How did you do it? How can we get on that? And so we had this huge period of expansion, and there was lots of stupid money floating around, and there was lots of companies that spun up that were ahead of their market, and that kept going, because people would give them more money, because why not? Different situation now. And so when the tide goes out, you see a lot of crap on the beach that accumulated, that you couldn't see before. And that's what we're heading into. And the strong will survive and the weak will perish right now, because the lines of credit and the personal stashes of money of these wealthy individuals that were getting into comics for their own reasons, whether or not there was demand for this particular kind of comic, like that's gonna tighten up a little bit, I think, and consequently we're gonna see more competition for around quality, more desire to retain the existing audience and make sure you don't lose anybody to competitors. Like, that's what happens when businesses go into a contractionary cycle, right? Different mindset takes over. It's not like, well, shit, let's try this, because why not? Like, and more of the industry is going to look like DC with the accountants breathing down their neck, than like, companies that are like, hey, let's debut with 8 titles a month.
I hear you, man. Absolutely. You mentioned before that Marvel's booth at New York was co-funded by their NFT partner. Where are we with NFTs? What are you seeing? Because it was a very shiny, new, interesting opportunity. There are certainly people that are skeptical about the NFT thing, but also NFTs themselves are also figuring themselves out in terms of what they can be, what they're being offered as, all that stuff. Oh, excuse me. I guess Chip is saying that Vive is not an NFT thing. I didn't know that, but I do still want to know what your thoughts are on NFTs right now.
Yeah, they kind of are. I don't know if they're
Okay.
still doing that, but they were certainly founded that way.
Okay. Is it Vive? Is that how you say it? Like Eve? Vive?
I call it Veve, but
Veve.
I
Okay.
knew them when they were eComey. I actually worked for them briefly, around this stuff. They may have pivoted. So companies that I had started working with, the reason is that I thought at the very beginning of all of this stuff that NFTs were a good way to get artists, especially comic artists who work digitally, paid for their originals, which is so that they didn't have to make a trade-off between page rate and productivity and having those originals to sell. Primarily, and also opening up new revenue opportunities for small publishers and small IP owners. Like, to me, it's like, okay, that's a thing that could happen. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of noise and there's issues with the technology, but I was fairly confident that the issues with the technology would get solved. They did eventually, but it's too late. So like this whole thing about Ethereum that was consuming all of this energy, and Ethereum is the blockchain that all this stuff was running on, and they moved over to a less carbon intensive computational model.
Okay.
Hooray. They did that last month after all the air had gone out of the market and everything. There's still interest somewhat on the crypto finance side, but the NFT thing has become so toxic because there were so many scams being run. The scammers drove out the good people, and the people that were saying, like, there's a lot of bad guys in this industry that are out for a quick buck, and that's going to ruin it. Those people were right. That's largely what happened. And so it happens a couple of times and people get burned and they're like, screw it, I'm not interested. It's not worth the trouble. A couple of companies that got in at the very beginning did okay and they made some money. And the value of these things has not dropped to zero on everything, but like NFT sales are down 98%, so,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
will it come back? Maybe. I mean, they're
Right.
again, the business case for why you would do it in the first place hasn't really changed, but the market certainly has. So
Understood.
and also, I think that a lot of that crypto money, especially people that had gotten in early, that were like these tech bros that were fans of this stuff, all of a sudden you're making like $100 million out of nothing, out of an investment of $1,000 a flyer that you took on Bitcoin in 2015, and now you've got crazy money. When you look at all the collectibles market and all these pages that are selling for $1 million or more, and these crazy values on these slabbed comics and things like that, I think a lot of the slush in that market was coming from that. And I'll be very interested to see how these new, what the auction trends are. I've got a piece coming out tomorrow or is tomorrow Friday?
Tomorrow
Or
is
Friday.
Thursday. Tomorrow's
I
Thursday.
have a piece coming out probably on Friday about a new heritage auction of some Rob Liefeld art by Liefeld that nobody has ever seen. Very interesting stuff.
Oh,
He's testing the market on some so I have an interview with him. I just talked to him today, and he was talking about how he works and stuff like that. And this is a different. These are his breakdowns basically, but they're
interesting.
tight. And he would do
Okay.
these thumbnails for pages, and then he would blow up the thumbnails, and then he would do the full renderings on
I
top of
understand.
them.
Yeah,
So he's
yeah.
actually putting some of the stuff out to market, to see, as he says, to test the waters and see if people go for it. That's a unique enough item. It's probably going to do well. Rob's got his fans, and they're always going to open their wallets
Oh,
because
yeah. Oh, yeah.
there's not much to be had if you like his stuff. So that's a special case. But I'm curious whether this general run up of all of these crazy prices on Bronze Age books and 9.8s and stuff like that is going to continue against the headwinds that we're seeing.
Interesting. No, Mike Norton would also provide breakdowns, and essentially used to do it on graph paper that was the size of like 8x11, and would sell those alongside his big pages that he was selling and stuff.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if, and again, now he's fully transferred to Wacom and doing his art on tablets and stuff, as many have. But I always appreciated that, and that sounds really interesting. I'm gonna drift on that and reach out to Liefeld and see if he wants to promote the Heritage Auction on Word Balloon as well. Don't worry, it won't be before your article comes out. I promise you. But that's great. So will that be?
You know what a shy guy he is. I don't know.
I'll see him and he's enthusiastic. Oh yeah, let's do something. And then I won't, then I'll try and bug him through email and I won't hear from him for months. So it's okay. And I love Rob. Rob's listen, I appreciate. Rob was one of the first big creators back in 2006, my first San Diego, and he heard my voice and he's like, "You're Word Balloon," and I'm like, "Why do you know who the fuck I am?" He goes, "Oh, I love your show." Well, Jesus, it was only my first year, and I'm like, "Oh man, that's great. Please come on, Rob." He's always a blast. No, I appreciate his enthusiasm, and no, I and he's a very funny guy. So
He is
I
indeed.
like Rob a lot. So that's great to hear. And again, that's a really cool product. And as you say, good Lord, every convention I see, the man's got lines out the yin yang in terms of, all right, I'll either like try and get his attention away from his line for a second out of the corner of his eye, or I'm cutting the line because, like, look, I'm not here to get my book signed. I just want to say hello to the guy for a second. That's all.
Yeah,
So,
well,
yeah.
I've sort of given away the teaser on this, but you're going to have to read the article on Friday for the full story of exactly what this is, because I think it's gonna
All right.
make it's especially for the art collectors out there. I mean, frankly, I'll be interested to see how this rolls, because it's an interesting,
Sure. God,
unique offering.
Phil Hester is a massive original art buyer, and I saw on Twitter today he was in the running to get a Ragman cover, and it was just like he's like, God, the prices today are just insane. And I hear him and other friends that are big art buyers and stuff. God, I'm so glad that I don't buy many. I don't really buy many pages, or never did. I always buy original commissions because to me it's almost a private performance of an artist and stuff. And I'm glad I got in when I did, and also now sometimes I'll get a friend rate rather than the full asking price because they appreciate the promotion I give them on Word Balloon and stuff. But yeah, man, good Lord, it's crazy, and God bless the artists, man. They are due every penny they can get. And I know the consumers are still excited, but man, it is like almost like the 90s and the speculation years where these, this original art, like you said, I mean, just the amount of money is crazy, So yeah, I hear you.
Indeed.
Yeah, I know there's no question in there. All right, let's see. I just want to see, oh, there. All right. Wesley says Liefeld is a trigger for me. I loved Extreme Studios, went all in Awesome Comics, and then it all ended. Still not over it. That Alan Moore Supreme run, absolutely, man. And
Yes.
So Veve, or how do you say it? Is it Veve? Are Veve collectibles and comics real NFTs? Says Chip. Yes, the collectibles and comics are real NFTs. They're live and immutable. God, do you want to read this?
Yeah. There. I mean, this is a rare moment. This is Chip saying that I'm right. This is great.
Yes, he did.
Thank you, Chip. Yes, they are NFTs.
Okay, there you go. Thank you for breaking it down. All right, good. Because honestly, I'm like, I was told there'd be no math today, so that's fantastic. And Chip has a link too that spells out are these real NFTs. So that's great. Too goddamn funny. You guys are killing me. This is wonderful. So only once says Chip, as far as
I know.
Fair enough, Chip. That's all right.
I'll take what I can get.
Hilarious. Yeah, dude. I mean, honestly, the NFTs were kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about. Anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to discuss?
Not really. As I said, I've got a spate of cool stuff coming up.
Yeah.
I mean, we covered this stuff with. I mean, I guess I will promote the project that I'm working on this user generated content. So the big panel that I did on Saturday.
At the con, yes.
Of course,
please tell me more.
premier user generated content platform out there isn't Webtoon, it's YouTube and TikTok, of course. So the people that are doing content for YouTube are getting these gigantic numbers. And so there's a very interesting group of these sort of young Asian and Asian American comedians doing sketch comedy. And there's a guy named Stephen He, for example, who does this emotional damage. I'm not going to do the voice, but if you know it, you know it. If you have kids, you know it. And he does these skits about about the mean Asian dad, humiliating his 20-year-old son for being a failure and stuff like that. They're absolutely hilarious. He was an out-of-work actor, and during the pandemic, he just started doing this stuff with his cell phone. And now he gets like tens of millions of subscribers. His stuff reaches like, so anyway, there's a whole group of these people, and they're getting together to do a collaborative, original, crowdsourced project called Ginormo, which is a spoof of like cheesy 60s monster and kaiju and robot, like the cheesiest stuff
Godzilla,
you can
Johnny
imagine.
Sacco. Yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So they shot it on the cheap, all practical effects. The producer is this guy Ken Mock, who did reality shows among other things. He did America's Next Top Model and a bunch of other stuff. And he sees user-generated content as the future. Like he saw the things go from scripted to unscripted. Now he sees UGC as the next thing. So he's put all these guys together. They've shot this thing. It is freaking hilarious. They're going to release it as a series of webisodes, and then it's going to be on the YouTube main channel. So it's a completely new way to do. The panel was called OMG, Ginormo is turning Hollywood upside down. Because they're not only sourced the performances, they source the model building, the costumes, the music, the animation, the opening credits, like all of that stuff is done by basically creators that are just pitch in to create this project, and then we're all going to monetize it together. And it's an interesting interesting approach. So I'm super psyched about that. Look for more Ginormo stuff as we get toward the end of the year, including Ginormo comics and Ginormo licensed merch and tabletop games, all created by fans of the show.
That's amazing. I know a guy, and he's actually in the Northwest, and his TikTok channel he's called Panda Red.
Mm-hmm.
And he was this college kid who went to school to learn how to do game design and just started making his own little comedy skits. And one big thing that he does is he'll do Bruce Wayne, Batman interviewing prospective Robins.
Yeah.
Do you know about this guy, Panda Red?
No, but I mean, that's exactly, that's like right down Main Street for these kind of things.
And he's hilarious. He's a great guy. And I've only had him. I've only done stuff with him again during lockdown. We did a couple events. My buddy Chad, the Pittsburgh guy that I did the Rigos with, really knows him well. And he's a funny guy. And
but these people are like big stars, and they didn't know it. And it's like I brought them to San Diego, and then I brought them to New York. And I had Steve, and I had this woman called Call Me Chris, who is like the number 4 person on TikTok. Like, so these folks are walking around the Comic-Con, and they're looking around because this is not their world. And every 10 steps, people are coming up to them, and like with Steve, they're like, "Oh, emotional damage guy, like do the thing." And then we had the panel, and they were thinking like, who's going to come to this panel? And it was like the Beatles at Shea Stadium. I mean, the room was full of these young, like, I don't think there was anybody like I single-handedly brought up the age demographic in the room about 20 years. So it was,
yes,
and it was very refreshing. It was very cool, and I think there's a bright future ahead for that kind of stuff.
Well, that's Panda Reb's numbers are in the high 6 figures, so he's not quite at 1 million, but he's doing quite well. And no, Rob, I hear you. And again, how you doing? I'm a couple of years older than you and everything, and it's just like I felt the same way. It's like, here's Grandpa talking to this little whippersnapper, but I so appreciate it. And this is where I share that vibe of Calvin Reed, where it's like, all right, we're old, but we appreciate, and you're obviously this way as well. You appreciate the new stuff that's happening. You see the trend, and it's great. And that is so, it fills my heart, because truly I got into Word Balloon when I was getting doors slammed on me in broadcasting. And at first I'm like, well, maybe I'll generate content to get me a better broadcast job. And then Word Balloon became its own thing. And it was wonderful. And it's like, listen, I'm not printing money. I'm getting by. My patrons, God bless them, my sponsors, everybody that contributes to Word Balloon, thank you so much. I hope that the content that I provide and my guests provide make it worth your while to support me. But that's great. And also these kids, this is, see, that this is the moves of the 20-somethings, as opposed to the influencers who just look great in a bathing suit and are holding their energy drink or whatever product they're holding at the minute. Hey, if you can make a buck that way, that's fantastic.
Yep.
I kind of find a lack of value and content that would compel me. But the kids you're describing and my buddy Panda Red, this is great, and I love this. I just
Well,
love it.
making a living doing what you love, that's success at any age and whatever you're doing. And that's my interest in the whole business of comic stuff. I love the medium, and I know that the people who make this stuff have got to be able to make ends meet, and have got to be able to survive in a hostile, in a business climate that is hostile to the creators, and be nothing without them. So I'm always on the lookout for new ways that those folks can get paid so that I can keep enjoying their work.
Absolutely, man. So right now, if people want to go to ICV2, they will see your interview that you have with the guy from Webtoons.
Yeah, correct. So I've got, if you go to the ICV2, just poke around on the site or search for me and you'll find all the stuff that I write there.
Yes.
My Forbes stuff, if you follow me on Twitter at Rob Salk, that's where I pimp all my writing, and you can the stuff on Forbes and Publishers Weekly and all the other places that I do stuff. And my DMs are open if people want to hit me up, about all kinds of other random stuff. That would be always happy to chat with your listeners, John.
Well, and also this panel that we're describing that you did with the user generated content. I hope that's going to be part of the NYCC panels that they've been putting out there, and I hope the Popverse will have.
I hope so. I hope so too, but I'm not sure I saw a camera in the room, so I'm.
Okay.
We kind of traded down. They had given us a incredibly shitty time slot, and but in a large room.
Okay.
And so I had to like trade down the size of the room to get a better time. And it's like I'd rather fill a small room than have it empty seats in a big room at 7:30 at night on Saturday in New York.
Sure.
So all right. By the way, hats off to the programming people. They made it work. So I'm not griping. They did a great job under adverse conditions. But anyway, when Ginormo drops, which will be in a couple of months, you will be hearing from me again, because we would love to share a clip with you. I can get Steven on. We can do a thing. It'll be if your audience is at all interested and is fans of this kind of kitschy, fun sci-fi humor stuff with a completely fresh take on it, we're there for you.
I appreciate that, and I would love that. That would be great. Hominis Noctura has our final comment. Webtoons, a lot of people creating great art and stories, and to think a few called them amateur hour. In the words of Rocky's son and Rocky Balboa, nobody's laughing anymore. Because, it's like everybody thought this was a joke, and you're beating the heavyweight champion. Nobody's laughing anymore. And, man, that's my favorite movie quote from like the last 15 years or so. And it's true. It's like, no, man. This is really becoming its own thing, and it's great to observe it. And I know Rob feels that way, the way he observes and puts the content out. So yes, please, man, let's do the Ginormo thing when it's ready. I would love to do that. That would be terrific. So Salkowitz, awesome. Always good to talk to you, man. And truly, I thank you for being a good friend over the years, and my best to Eunice. And I look forward to us being face to face soon. Hang on. I want to post a broadcast, talk to you for a couple minutes. But I hope everyone enjoyed this conversation. It exceeded expectations. Shame on me. I should have expected it, because that's kind of talk Rob always delivers. So that's going to do it, I think, this week for Word Balloon. Next week, a whole new slate of Word Balloon Lives. I have a lot of audio to catch up on because I had technical difficulties. I got the good computer back. So believe me, and as tomorrow dropping, I was telling Rob off the air, a great phone conversation I had. We didn't do video. Gary Conway, who was the star of Irwin Allen's television show, Land of the Giants. He's 85 years old, sharp as a tack. He is Alex Ross's Reed Richards model for the Fantastic Four Full Circle graphic novel. So I hope you'll listen to that. I'll be dropping that probably along with this conversation with Rob. So look for all that tomorrow, if not definitely Friday, for the audio version of this. But thanks for watching. Everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.